Mr. Sterling collapsed onto the black and white marble, his custom Italian suit pooling around him like a dark stain. The abrasive sound of his restricted airway echoed through the empty foyer. This was a genuine medical emergency, a severe asthma attack brought on by the stress of running his underground syndicate. He clawed at his throat, desperate for oxygen. I stood over him. In my right hand, I held his blue rescue inhaler. In my left, I held the heavy gold locket he had forced my mother to conceal 14 years ago. The gold was cold against my palm. He looked up, his face slick with sweat, expecting a frightened child to rush to his aid. Instead, he found me standing perfectly still. I watched the frantic rise and fall of his chest. Yesterday, he had cruelly ordered my mother to pack our bags, tossing her years of loyalty into the street to protect his pristine corporate facade. Now, the ruthless boss who dictated lives and destroyed rivals was entirely at my mercy. He stretched a trembling hand toward my shoes, begging for air. For 10 years, my mother scrubbed the floors of this fortress. Sterling did not just run a telecommunications monopoly. He operated a sophisticated mafia, silencing competitors and buying politicians. My mother moved through his mansion like a phantom in a starched gray uniform, erasing the scuff marks left by his dangerous associates. She endured the indignity with absolute patience. He treated her as less than human, stepping over her soapy hands as if she were a piece of furniture. The climax of his cruelty occurred just 24 hours ago. He summoned her to the grand study, flanked by his enforcers. He informed her that she was becoming a liability, a loose end from a past he wished to bury. He gave her exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises, discarding a decade of silent servitude without a fraction of hesitation. My mother did not beg or plead. She simply nodded, maintaining her quiet dignity, and walked back to the servants' quarters to pack our meager belongings. I watched him pour a glass of expensive bourbon, celebrating his perceived victory. He believed he was severing a useless tie, eliminating the maid who knew too much about his early, illicit operations. He failed to comprehend that her compliance was a calculated retreat. We were never just collateral damage in his criminal empire. We were the silent architects of his impending downfall. He kicked out the maid, utterly unaware that he had just initiated the final sequence of his own destruction, leaving himself entirely isolated when his failing lungs finally betrayed him the very next morning. The abrasive wheezing transformed into a hollow, wet rattling. His face contorted, shifting into a dangerous shade of purple. The polished stone floor offered no traction for his slipping fingers. I crouched down, bringing the plastic cylinder into his line of sight. He reached for it, his movements uncoordinated and desperate. I pulled it back slightly. He froze. His gaze shifted from the medication to the open gold locket dangling from my fingers. Inside rested a faded photograph of him and my mother, taken before the betrayals and the stolen patents that built his illicit syndicate. I leaned close, ensuring my voice was the only sound cutting through his panic. "You built a criminal empire out of stolen blueprints," I stated, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "You threw away your own blood to protect a lie. You disowned us, Julian." I placed the mouthpiece between his lips. He inhaled the medication with a violent, ragged pull, his chest heaving as the chemicals forced his airways open. He slumped against the marble, a broken man staring at the ornate ceiling. The hierarchy of the room shattered completely. He was no longer the untouchable boss who ordered hits and manipulated markets. He was an aging, vulnerable target, suddenly acutely aware that the ghost he had just evicted held the keys to his absolute ruin. I stood up, securing the locket inside my pocket. I looked down at him one last time, offering no comfort, and walked away, leaving him to process the catastrophic error of his arrogance. The private recovery wing smelled intensely of antiseptic chemicals and expensive floral arrangements. Sterling sat upright against the pillows, a web of monitoring wires taped to his chest. Two heavy-set men in tailored suits stood guard outside the door, his typical enforcers poorly disguised as corporate security. When I entered the room, he dismissed his attending nurses with a sharp, dismissive gesture. He adjusted his hospital gown, attempting to project his usual intimidating authority. "Maya," he said, testing the syllables as if they tasted metallic. "You expect a substantial reward for your timely intervention." I stopped at the foot of his bed, keeping my posture rigid. "Expect nothing from a thief," I replied smoothly. His jaw tightened. He leaned forward, trying to loom over me despite his weakened state. "I am a powerful man. People who threaten my interests tend to disappear." I stepped closer to the sterile metal railing. "You operate a cartel hiding behind corporate letterheads, Julian. But your entire structure relies on the illusion of absolute legitimacy. You need the board of directors, the public trust, and the offshore banks to look the other way." I watched his heart monitor blip at a steady, rhythmic pace. "If they discover their visionary leader is a fraud who stole his foundational technology, your entire organization collapses in seconds." He stared at me, calculating the exact level of threat I presented. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that he was negotiating with a rival intellect. I turned toward the heavy door, leaving the suffocating silence to settle over him. The absolute truth of his empire was concealed in the servants' quarters, hidden beneath a loose floorboard under my mother's narrow, uncomfortable cot. It was a simple, leather-bound diary, its pages fragile and smelling of damp earth. Inside lay the meticulously drawn schematics and complex algorithms my mother had coded during her university years. It was the complete blueprint for the decentralized routing protocol that made Sterling's telecommunications monopoly possible. He did not invent the network that controlled half the region. He stole it from a brilliant scholarship student and threatened her with syndicate violence to ensure her absolute compliance. I spent months translating her encoded notes, cross-referencing the technical data with Sterling's original patent filings. The match was exact, right down to the foundational security flaws my mother had intentionally left in the alpha version. The diary was a loaded weapon. It proved he was a parasite, taking credit for a genius he could never replicate. We were never victims of his unfortunate circumstances. We were the rightful owners of a multi-billion-dollar operation, reduced to scrubbing his floors, while the thief paraded as an industry titan. Sitting in that cramped room, holding the undeniable proof of his ultimate crime, my path forward solidified. I did not desire an apology. I did not want a quiet financial settlement or a modest trust fund. I required complete annihilation. I intended to take the empire he had built on our backs and strip him of every asset, every ally, and every ounce of respect he had ever stolen from us. The study served as a monument to his ill-gotten wealth. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, centered around a massive oak desk that smelled faintly of aged cigar smoke. Sterling slid a heavy aluminum briefcase across the polished wood. The metal clasps clicked open loudly in the quiet room, revealing neat, banded stacks of $100 bills. 1 million, he stated, steepling his fingers together. A generous severance for your mother's prolonged services. You both leave the city tonight. You never mention the locket or the patent ever again. I looked at the cash, feeling absolutely nothing. It was a pathetic, predictable offer from a man accustomed to buying his way out of criminal liabilities. I pushed the briefcase back across the expansive desk, the metal scraping harshly against the wood. Keep your money, I said. You will need it for your legal defense. His face hardened into a mask of pure, concentrated hostility. You are playing a highly dangerous game. You do not understand the people I work with. The syndicate does not tolerate loose ends. I leaned over the desk, maintaining unbroken eye contact. I understand exactly how your syndicate functions, I replied. They follow the profit margins. They respect absolute power. Right now, you are a massive liability. When they see the evidence of your fraud, they will not protect you. They will devour you to save themselves. I turned my back to him, a deliberate show of ultimate disrespect, and walked toward the heavy doors. Enjoy your gala tomorrow, Julian. It will be an unforgettable evening. The mansion was transformed into an opulent stage for the annual charity gala. A string quartet played softly in the corner of the grand ballroom, their music drifting over the hushed conversations of politicians, legacy families, and the ruthless executives who formed Sterling's inner circle. They wore heavy diamonds and tailored tuxedos, sipping champagne while trading favors and securing alliances. I moved through the crowded room carrying a silver tray of appetizers, entirely invisible in my plain black uniform. I watched Sterling hold court near the towering ice sculpture, smiling confidently, clapping a federal judge on the shoulder. He believed the briefcase of cash had intimidated me into submission. He believed his meticulously crafted public image was an impenetrable armor. He had no idea I spent the morning in the audiovisual control room, bypassing the simple padlock on the media cabinet. I observed the incredibly fragile ecosystem of his elite society. Every handshake was a calculated transaction, every smile a strategic lie. They were a pack of wolves, held together solely by the perception of his unyielding power and respectability. I set my silver tray down on a side table and slipped into the dark alcove near the main projector feed. The heavy USB drive in my pocket contained no complex viruses or hacked server codes. It held only the unvarnished, ugly truth of his past, digitized and waiting. I plugged it into the master terminal, the small confirmation light glowing green in the dim shadows. I stepped back out into the room, ready to dismantle a billionaire with his own grand presentation. Sterling tapped his crystal champagne flute with a silver spoon. The sharp, ringing sound cut effortlessly through the low murmur of the crowded ballroom. The wolves gathered around the base of the grand staircase, waiting in silence for their alpha to speak. Behind him, a massive projector screen displayed his corporate logo in pristine white light. Friends, esteemed partners, Sterling began, raising his glass. a highly practiced smile fixed on his face. Tonight, we celebrate a legacy built on integrity, innovation, and self-made success. I stood near the back wall and pressed the remote in my apron pocket. The screen behind him went black for a fraction of a second. Then, it illuminated the room with a massive, high-definition scan of the faded photograph from my locket. A young Sterling, standing next to my mother, his arm wrapped around her shoulder, holding the original patent blueprints. The murmurs began instantly. Sterling continued his speech for 3 seconds before noticing the shifting faces of his audience. He turned around. The image changed. It displayed the signed, notarized documents proving the intellectual property belonged entirely to the young, chocolate-skinned woman standing beside him in the photograph. Then, the audio played through the ballroom's state-of-the-art surround sound. It was the recording from the study. Sterling's own voice echoed over the crowd. The syndicate does not tolerate loose ends. The room plunged into a tense, confused silence. From the top of the grand marble staircase, my mother stepped into the light, wearing a perfectly tailored dark blazer. She looked down at him, an undeniable ghost crashing his celebration. The room erupted into a chaos of angry whispers and sharp looks. The silence was over. Sterling stood at the center of the ballroom, but he looked smaller now. His face turned a sickly shade of gray under the crystal lights. Evelyn, his fiancée, walked straight toward him. She didn't cry. Her face was like stone. She slowly pulled the massive diamond ring from her finger. Instead of handing it to him, she dropped it into his glass of champagne. The gold hit the bottom with a dull clink. Then, she swung her hand and slapped him so hard his head snapped to the side. The sound echoed off the high ceilings. She walked away without looking back, her silk dress rustling in the quiet. Next came Oliver, his oldest business partner. Oliver didn't whisper. He spoke loudly so the whole room could hear. "I never knew you were this pathetic, Julian. Our deal is dead. My lawyers will contact you by morning." He turned his back, and the rest of the board members followed him like a line of soldiers. The guests began to move away, creating a wide circle of empty space around Sterling. It was like he had a disease they didn't want to catch. He reached out to grab a friend's arm, but the man pushed him away with a look of pure hate. He was a king 10 minutes ago. Now he was just a man standing alone on a rug. I watched him from the shadows. I felt nothing but the cold peace of a finished job. He was finally seeing the true cost. Blue and red lights flashed violently against the mansion's tall windows, cutting through the darkness of the sprawling estate. The audio recording of his syndicate threats had provided the local authorities with all the probable cause they needed. Police officers moved quickly through the foyer, their heavy boots loud against the black and white marble floor. They flanked Sterling, reading him his rights in a flat, administrative tone. His hands were bound in cold steel. The tailored charcoal suit looked entirely out of place now, reduced to a pathetic costume on a broken, utterly humiliated man. His legacy was gone. His allies were gone. They marched him aggressively toward the heavy oak front doors. Just before crossing the threshold, he stopped and looked back, gazing up the sweeping curve of the grand staircase. My mother stood on the main landing, her posture commanding, absolute, and unyielding. She held the original leather-bound diary in her hands, the true, legal deed to the empire he had falsely claimed. I walked up the steps and stood quietly beside her, looking down at the man who had tried to erase our existence. Sterling stared at us, the final devastating blow landing not on his finances, but on his fragile, shattered ego. He realized she had spent a decade scrubbing his floors, absorbing his cruelty, only to strip him bare in front of the entire world. The officers pulled him forward, forcing him out into the cold night air. The heavy doors slammed shut with a definitive, echoing thud. The massive mansion was finally quiet. The estate was ours. The Silver Fox just lost everything in 60 seconds. But who had the most satisfying moment? Evelyn for the champagne ring slap, Oliver for killing the business deal, or Maya's mother for finally standing at the top of the stairs as the true owner of the empire? And be honest, if you were Maya standing in that foyer, would you have even given him that inhaler in Chapter 1? Cast your vote below and tell me why.